Hey everyone, this is Alexis, host of The Adam Kiss Show, and today I will be talking with actor, writer, director, singer, and independent filmmaker Adam Kiss. We will hear Adam perform various accents as well as recite some of his favorite Shakespearean monologues. Feel free to comment and share. We would love to hear from you. And now, here's Adam.
Well, thank you so much once again for that wonderful introduction. Excited to get into it today.
Yeah, of course. So let's start by talking about some of the accents you have learned to do. Could you tell us which ones those are and give us an example of each?
Sure, of course. So the interesting thing is that I've always kind of had a knack for accents or a talent for doing accents. I'm not sure where that really came from, but really from a young age, I mean, I've always been a performer. I was a shy person growing up, but in terms of performing, that was always where I really thrived. So for some reason, for example, when we went to Britain, as a kid on a family vacation, I just suddenly started kind of talking in that way. And also from movies, you pick it up. But I guess what it is I'm able to pick up. I have a good ear. Maybe it's because I'm also a musician. I have a good ear for hearing things, being able to imitate them. And so, if you hear something, for example, like if you tell me some random accent that I've never heard, obviously I wouldn't even know what it is. But if I go look it up, I listen to a few people talking like that, then in an hour or two I can be talking like that too. It's really just a matter of it's nothing I ever learned, or I never took an accent class per se. Um, Thankfully, I think, because I think certain things can't really be taught, at least not in words. I mean, I think it's better to almost, if you learn yourself how to do it, because everyone has a different method, as opposed to learning some mechanical way of doing a certain accent. Obviously, as a singer, I did have, diction classes in several languages. So, English diction, Italian diction, French diction. But that was not, necessarily talking in English with an accent like that. That was talking in those languages. Um, for example, I mean, I mentioned British, so I've done that accent so many times. Last year, I actually filmed 2 episodes of a TV series where I was doing a Russian accent. So that was very interesting. I was kind of playing this, the macho Russian boyfriend, which was kind of a fun role. Yeah, so I really enjoyed doing that. I can do my heritage. My mom's side is Hungarian, so that's Eastern European. So I can do a lot of those Eastern European accents very well. A lot of those are actually pretty unique depending on the country, especially Hungarian, which is actually a very, very unique accent in terms of speaking English with it. Especially so because Hungarian is a language that is unlike any other. It's not related to any of its neighbors. It's not, it's not like it doesn't have really roots in Latin too much. I mean, certain words, obviously, but it's kind of its own thing. Um, yeah, so Russian, British. I do several types of British, either English, upper crust, Cockney. I can I can talk like this, and be very upper crust, or I can talk like this and, be more a Cockney. And then, if you're doing the Cockney, that's very similar already to Australian, where you go, good eye, mate, yeah, let's put some shrimp on the barbie. I mean, that's the cliche, but those two are similar, obviously, because they're, originally Australia was a penal colony, so they sent, a lot of the prisoners there, which is kind of why the accent is pretty similar, I would say. It evolved, obviously, over the years. Um, and obviously, that's just how it started, and so many other people immigrated there once travel became more accessible. And it kind of became its own thing. But yeah, so I've gone through British, Australian. I mean, yes, when I talk like a Russian accent, I just, it's more like this. I have to talk like this, and then you just go with it a little bit, and you do that kind of thing. I hope I'm being entertaining here. So in the meantime, okay, so I've gone through Russian, British, Australian. I love a Scottish accent. That's so you think of Macbeth when you think of Scottish. I think I literally just did a video on that where you go, it's just very tomata and tomata and tomata creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. You know, you just have to think of, Sean Connery or Mel Gibson in Braveheart or things like that, to think of a Scottish accent. What else? There's so many. I mean, there's so many more I could go through, but I think that's a pretty good start.
Well, from those lists, I love all of them, but what would you say, which one is your favorite to do?
Well, I would absolutely say that I absolutely love doing a British accent. For some reason, I believe that that's what comes the most naturally to me. I could just go on like this all day. I could probably just switch to talking like this, and wouldn't have a problem any day.
Love that. No, I love that.
And
One thing I was gonna
especially, I I always grew up. I loved Richard Burton, who's a British actor on stage and screen, and he was actually originally Welsh, so he had a very different accent. He was born Richard Jenkins actually, which is more of a Welsh name. He changed it to Burton, but he also he didn't naturally speak with that kind of a British accent, but he kind of put it on for the rest of his life, just because I guess he felt that would be better for stage and screen. But in the meantime, I've interrupted you, and what were you going to ask me?
No, of course, yeah. I was just wondering, we talk a lot about old movies, and I hadn't heard you mention yet. I think it's the Mid-Atlantic accent, and that was really popular during, you think Gene Kelly, Cary Grant, and all of them had, and my sister and I always loved it and wish we could talk like that because it was kind of a mix between, I guess, a British and American.
Yeah.
So yeah, have you ever done that accent or like tried it or even acted with it?
The lost accent, huh? Yes, that's the one that nobody talks with anymore. It's as dead as Latin, it seems like. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of a mix between that upper crust, British accent versus kind of more of a New England proper American. I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess the most famous person who kind of acted or just generally spoke with that sort of accent was Cary Grant. And he kind of held on to that for longer than like into the 60s when he kept acting until the 60s. Otherwise it kind of seems to have disappeared in the 50s or so, maybe the 60s. In terms of doing it, I haven't really had a chance to.
Yeah, and so you said it kind of disappeared, but why do you think it disappeared? And when did it kind of start? Or if you're saying kind of Cary Grant, and I know he was British, so that could have been part of the reason he was already, naturally, had an accent or an English accent. But why do you think it disappeared so suddenly? I mean, because it was a beautiful accent, and all the Hollywood, a lot of them were kind of made to learn it. So why do you think it just suddenly disappeared?
Absolutely. I mean, people were coached by diction coaches to talk like that, which is why sometimes it can come off, very stilted and, very, very, very formal, like they're really talking like for the stage, which is, I mean, how film got started. I mean, that's why they started calling them screen plays. They literally got playwrights to write, scripts for the screen because once the sound movies came along, they just hired playwrights because there was no such thing as a screenwriter. And so, in terms of the accent and in terms of the dialogue, they were much more formal. But in terms of someone like Cary Grant, I don't think he was a coach to put anything on. I think he was from Britain and he was just doing his best to do an American accent, and
Yes,
that's what
yes.
came out of an in between mix. And as for why it went away, I mean, I think what kind of killed it, and I'm not sure if this is a good or bad thing, but what kind of killed it was that whole movement starting kind of in the late 40s, early 50s with, directors like Elia Kazan, people like Marlon Brando just kind of mumbling through, doing like very realistic, like uber realistic performances. And I think that's what kind of killed it. And then that became so popular. And then, pretty soon everyone was just, and suddenly you're saying, well, what are they even saying,
Yes, yes.
So then it kind of went to the other extreme where, I'll make him an offer he can't refuse.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
yeah, that was my Godfather impression. So
Yeah, it is really neat to see how the times, voices change. I mean, because you even hear kind of a little bit of accents, or at least I've always noticed. I feel like even in the '80s they kind of had a different way of talking. Now they're talking differently and much more. Even like speed of talking. They talk so fast and there was so much script, and you sometimes can keep up. I know. I think it was. it was with Cary Grant, and I forgot the lady's name. You would know her right off, and I think it's my girl. Is it My Girl Friday?
His Girl Friday with
His
Cary Grant
Girl.
and Rosalind Russell and
Yes.
Ralph Bellamy.
I mean, the way they talk, they flew. I mean, their speed was incredible, and now it's you don't say that much, or at least not in that amount of time. So
Yeah, it has that movie has probably more words than most movies. Um,
yes,
funny thing is that I think Rosalind Russell, funny behind the scenes story is that for that movie, she wasn't really happy with her lines. She didn't think they were funny enough, so she hired a separate, a joke writer to write her extra funny lines. And then Cary Grant saw that, so he hired one. So then just kept adding lines to the script. So that's also probably why they had to kind of get through all this material.
really, that is amazing. I had no idea. But yeah, that's really neat. Yeah, so I guess moving on, we kind of talked a little bit about how you got started and that you've kind of always been natural at it. Um, I guess I'd like to talk a little bit about, your experience, doing, Shakespeare plays, in theater, and, how many accents do you use for Shakespeare? Obviously I'm thinking like, okay, he's probably doing British, English, but how many different types do you do, or have you done while doing these plays?
Absolutely. So that's a very good question and kind of an interesting topic, accents in Shakespeare. So you'd think that when you play, because a lot of, in the histories, for example, a lot of the characters are actually British. If you're doing Henry V, Henry IV, Part One, Henry IV, Part Two, Richard III, Richard II, all those history plays, they just go on. He wrote a good chunk of history plays that are about British history, whether it's English or Scottish, and so on. But so you think that when you perform those, you should do them with a British accent. And then you start to think, well, wait a minute. So that's one way of doing it. Or you could start to think that in those days, the British accent didn't sound anything like it does today. That whole British accent was kind of invented in the 19th century. And Shakespeare was, working in the late 1500s, early 1600s. And the plays, the history plays were from even earlier, 1300s, 1400s, etc., so some even earlier. Um, so the interesting thing is that, I mean, there's that whole idea that there's this place somewhere in the South in America, where there's this island that's kind of cut off, and they say that American accent is almost the most similar to like what Shakespeare would have had, and it doesn't sound British at all. It sounds more like a Southern accent, so
Yes.
it's interesting to think that they reason that because that area has been so cut off that they've kind of been speaking in that accent since then, which is a very peculiar one. It's somewhat like a Southern accent with some tweaks. I'm talking about Southern, like American, like from the South. So
Yes.
it's very interesting that some people think that that was actually closer to the way that they spoke in those days. Um, Kind of not what you'd expect at all. But in terms of you hear people going all over the map. Yeah, obviously, if you hear Shakespeare play either a play or a movie version in England, they're going to obviously be doing their British accents. If you hear it in America, usually the choice is not to do that, but to just do a regular American accent, even if you're playing a British character, simply because that was not really the accent that was going on at the time.
I had no
We know
idea.
that much for sure. Um, so honestly, I mean, obviously, one choice that's usually pretty strong is when you do the Scottish play Macbeth, you usually do the Scottish accent, the tomato, tomato, tomato. Usually that's a strong choice, if for no other reason than just because it sounds cool. Um,
Yeah, yes.
kind of it. So in a certain way, I like doing that. And then obviously it depends on the production. I mean, if you're going British, I've done Shakespeare in a British accent. I've done it in an American accent. I've obviously done. I've never done the full Macbeth. I'd love to in the future, but I've done excerpts in a Scottish accent, which is it's really great. I think it's his shortest tragedy, but it's definitely one of his Shakespeare's best. And yeah, I hope that answers some of your questions in a rambling way.
Yeah, of course. When you were talking, I just kind of was thinking, and I'm, not an actor, so I don't know how really, I know actors, they kind of become the people, their characters. So I just wondered, does it, like, when you put on accent, I know, for example, with British, you said that, you said you could do it all day, but like with some accents that are maybe like the Scottish, they're fun to do. Do you feel like it's harder to act like more like I guess I should say, like, I don't know, true to yourself or true to your character? Or is it like, how do you transition? Like, is that hard to do when you're taking on an accent that's not your native one?
Well, let me answer that with an anecdote. So, Dustin Hoffman and Laurence Olivier were both making the movie Marathon Man in the 70s.
Okay.
And for one scene, Dustin Hoffman, he stayed up, I think, for a few nights. He didn't let himself sleep. He kind of started running around. He kind of wanted to make himself feel totally stressed because that's how he was in the scene. And they went to do the scene, and Laurence Olivier, he looked at him and he said, what happened? And Dustin Hoffman told him, all the stuff he'd been doing, to get ready for the scene. And Laurence Olivier looked at him and he said, yes, my dear boy, but why don't you just act? Um, and I find that so true. I would not consider myself, for example, a method actor or like somebody who doesn't like break character for the 6 months you're doing a movie or something. I know that so many people do that. Like Daniel Day Lewis is a famous example. He doesn't break character. I mean, I find that's great. I mean, obviously it must get results, but it must be just a terrible way, because you can do basically the same thing by just acting, which is why it's called acting. I mean, it's fake. And then like you hear stories of other people who are just really nasty to people on the set and stuff because their character is nasty or that they don't talk to anybody at all. And I find that that's really not a way to live, especially if you're doing something for such an extended period of time.
Yeah.
So now going back to your question about accents, I mean, I definitely, if I'm doing an accent, I don't suddenly forever stay in that accent, because I mean, there's a plus to that because then you live it and you're totally in it and you almost don't know anything else. You almost forget the way you normally talk.
Uh-huh.
But then you kind of really lose yourself, which is the point of that whole thing. But I've never really bought into the whole total going full method into a role. And it's the same, with the accents that, you do it. It's kind of really a technical thing. Um, I don't find that it's something that's so challenging to do, thankfully. It's not something that I really have to focus on too much doing accents. I'd rather focus on other things like I'm doing the accent, but I'm focusing on the performance or the drama. I don't have to think about the accent, thankfully. And I think that's where, as long as everyone can get to a point where they don't have to think about it, that's all that's important.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really neat to hear because I know that's a kind of a that's always been a debate whether method acting is good, bad. I know there's been movies, we had student films I saw watch that were like, playing off of that, like somebody can't stop and they become a serial killer because that's their part and they can't give it up. And so it's neat hearing that from an actor. Yeah, so uh I guess now I'd like to move on and maybe ask you to recite maybe some of your favorite Shakespearean monologues for us. If you could do that, that would be awesome.
Sure. So, off the top of my head, I'll go for the famous one.
Okay.
So, this is from Hamlet, and it's an obscure one called To Be or Not to Be.
Okay.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. To die to sleep, no more. And by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished to die. To sleep, to sleep. Perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. Who would bear the whips and scorns of time? The oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, The law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare body. Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not. Thus conscience doth make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is fickled o'er with the pale cast of thoughts. And enterprises, great pith and moment, with this regard their currents turn awry, lose the name of action. And that's the end.
I love that. That is awesome. Just so weird to just see your face just kind of like all of a sudden turn. It's like into like a whole other character, and I've never seen that. I think that's so cool.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
it
mean,
sounds. Or go ahead. I was just saying, it sounds like whenever I'm listening to it, I'm like, wow, this reminds me of like, yeah, I'm listening to an audiobook and I'm hearing the story, this is really cool.
I mean,
Yeah.
I love Shakespeare. It's particularly suited to me for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm an over-the-top person, and it's not Shakespeare. You can't. I mean, they've done productions that are totally, deadpan realistic, but that's not what it's about. Shakespeare. It's not like about realistic. Hey, what's up? Yeah, okay, I'm doing good. Oh, okay, yeah, what do you want to do later? No, it's not that kind of dialogue. It's elevated. It's the kind where where you really do have to. You can't go really I mean, Marlon Brando did Shakespeare, but in terms of he did Julius Caesar, I know the movie version, but you can't really do that whole realistic kind of more like mumbly version of talking. You really have to bring out the words because it's all about bringing out the words for the audience. I mean, in those days they used to say I'm going to listen to a play instead of I'm going to see a play because it was all about the words. Um, and yeah, I can start. I can at least start another one. If we have
Yeah,
time, I'll do part of another one.
I'd love to hear that. And before I go on, I just wanted to quickly ask, how long did that take you to learn? And have you do you have to keep practicing it to remember it, or is it kind of just like ingrained for like a certain amount of time? Just curious with that one.
This monologue you just heard, I don't think I've listened to it or read it or performed it in at least 6 months. So
Wow.
it's just kind of there in the back of my head. I haven't. Yeah, I love that one. But yeah, the funny thing, I'm glad I had the opportunity to do it today because I really don't think I've even said it out loud for at least 6 months. So
Wow, that is amazing. Yeah, yeah, go ahead and show us another one.
sure, I'll do one with a British accent. So here's some Richard III.
Okay.
Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this son of York, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths. And I'll leave it there. But it's that's a really fun one. I love Richard III. It's such a fun part to play. I've never played him, obviously. I'm basically too young to play Richard III, but it's such a great part. So maybe at some point in the future.
I love that. Yes, that was Richard III was one of the ones I've heard of Hamlet, of course, but Richard III, my school actually put on.
Ah,
So I've seen it before, so I know a little bit more about that one than I do a lot of the others. So I just think that's really neat
well,
to.
and then my one of my favorites is the Crispin's Day speech from Henry V. So that's what's he that wishes so? My cousin Westmoreland? No, my fair cousin. If we are marked to die, we are enough to do our country loss. And if to live, the fewer men the greater share of honour. God's will, I pray thee, wish not one man more. Rather proclaim it, Westmoreland, through my host, that he which hath no stomach to this fight, let him depart. His passport shall be made, and crowns for convoy put into his purse. We shall not die in that man's company that fears his fellowship to die with us. This day is called the Feast of Crispian. He that outlives this day and comes safe home shall stand a tiptoe when this day is named, and rouse him at the name of Crispian. He that shall live this day and see old age will yearly on the vigil feast his neighbours and say, tomorrow is St. Crispian. Then will he strip his sleeve and show his scars and say, these wounds I had on Crispian's day. Old men forget. It all shall be forgot, but he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day. And shall our names, familiar in his mouth as household words, Harry the King, Bedford and Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury and Gloucester, be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. This story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispian shall ne'er go by from this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Be he ne'er so base, this day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen in England, now abed, shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, whiles any speaks that fought with us. Upon St. Crispian's day! So that's a rousing one, but that's the big battle speech.
I love that. I love the way
Yeah.
what stood out to me was whenever you said tiptoe. I love that. That was it was really exciting, really fun. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. That's awesome. I'd like to I know we're getting close to the end of this session, so I'd like to kind of end it on, you've been speaking a lot with accents, but I'd like, if anybody has been listening to us for our previous episodes, they know you are your mother is, and like you said in this episode as well, is Hungarian, and we talked with her a little bit about last week, and I just would like to kind of hear you speak maybe anything, something, whether that's a monologue or just conversation, hello, that kind of thing. But I'd like to hear it in a little bit of a conversation in your own native language, because I think as well as I know you've done a little bit, you might have done a little bit of it, but maybe also speaking with a Hungarian accent, but in English. So kind of maybe repeat what you said in Hungarian, but do it with an Hungarian accent speaking English, if that makes sense. I think that would be really neat for our audience to listen to hear.
Okay, so let's do this conversation in Hungarian. I hope you've been studying. Well, the funny thing is that I can say anything, and probably you won't know what I'm saying, so I could probably get away with anything here. But no, I'm going to behave. So yeah, sure, I'll say something in Hungarian. So most beszélek magyarul, én nagyon szeretek beszélni magyarul. Az anyámmal sokszor beszélek így, és a nagyszülőkkel sajnos most mindketten most már nincsenek itt, de viszont én imádom a nyelvet, imádok oda menni, és igen, ennyi volt az egész most legalább. Tudok így menni tovább, de ez elég volt most. Yeah,
So
so I've
can
said
you
that.
translate for
I don't
us?
think, because it's so close to me, maybe I'll save that for another time. Maybe we should
Okay,
do that another time, doing the Hungarian accent, because that's a whole other thing, which is it's very interesting. But yeah, maybe we should do that another time. I know we're also running out of time today.
yes, yes, of
Give
course.
that its proper due. So maybe that's something our listeners can look forward to.
I appreciate it. Yeah, that was awesome. I love that. That's definitely something I'd like to ask and hear more about, because you don't meet a whole lot of people that can speak another second language like Hungarian. You don't meet that every day, or European. So I love.
Absolument. And one accent that I forgot to mention is actually a French accent, which is a very interesting one as well. Yeah, I like it.
That's awesome. So have you done French as well? Have you acted in French, or you just like
I
performed?
did, yeah, I did one on stage. I did one where I had to do a French accent. Yeah.
I love that. That is awesome. Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, you think of, if you want to go easy, you just think of Inspector Clouseau, and then you just mix it up a little bit, maybe.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, so much. I'd like to ask you, I was going to ask you another question, but I know we're kind of, I'd like to go on and interview, have a second interview. So I might bring this question up in the next one. So yeah, I guess let me go ahead and list some of your social media platforms. We have Instagram at Adam Kiss Productions, at adamkiss.official, and at My Last Words Movie. TikTok, Adam can be found at Adam Kiss Official. No dot in between those two. Facebook and YouTube at Adam Kiss Official, and that's where you're gonna find this episode. One of the places, at least on YouTube. Twitter, he is at Real Adam Kiss, and those are all, each word is uppercase, capitalized. I'm sorry, RAK. You can also find Adam on IMDb or at his website, adamkissofficial.com. And of course, to all of you listeners, we will be releasing this episode next Monday, and it will be on Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube, of course, Google Podcasts, and I feel like I'm forgetting one, Amazon Music. And we're also going to be adding pretty soon, once we get this set up, added on Apple Podcasts.
All of the major news networks
Yes.
playing the loop 24/7.
Yes, I love it. Yes, I think people find this very interesting to hear about you, your accents. This was really fun today. That's all we have time for. So thank you again, Adam, for discussing accents with us. I look forward to talking with you again next week on a different topic. And yeah, be sure to follow us, all of you who are listening, to get notified when the next episode is released. And thank you again, Adam. Have a great rest of your day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone.